Good afternoon and evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Craig Fleischer, and I'll be moderating our session on the next 30 years of CI, vision, scenarios, and perspectives. We're thrilled to have you with us today, and I know we've got a good crowd that's coming to join us, so we thank you for being here. Next slide, Ben. So I just want to briefly, again, you've probably met me, and for those of you who were on our earlier session today, where we actually looked backwards 30 years, if you want to think of it, this is the forward look of that. So we're going to kind of build on some of the commentary and discussion that we had in that session. I'll be looking forward to threading that in. Next slide. We have three presenters that are going to be joining us today. All three of these, by the way, distinguished CI fellows. I'm really excited for each of them. I'll start off with Rostyk Hursky. Just a few comments about Rostyk. I've known Rostyk for many years. He's one of Canada's leading CI practitioners. He's worked on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, so he's kind of seen it from a number of different perspectives, but he's currently actually the Director of Impact and Strategy at the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation. For those of you who don't know where Saskatchewan is, it's kind of in the middle of Canada, and for those who haven't been there, I'd certainly recommend that you go there, and when you do, Rostyk is a wonderful host for you. But he's got a really important job at actually helping the health sector there communicate, help to support some of the important research that goes on in that sector. And he's trying to really drive that forward. So he's in a wonderful position as a CI influencer. And I know he's going to spend a lot of time sharing with us some of the things that he's been thinking about and looking at. Rostyk is very much into foresight and foresight processes. And he's not just going to talk about them, he's doing them. So really excited to have Rostyk. Next up, we've got Louis Madureira. Louis is another one, again, I've known for many years. Louis is out in Portugal, and he's a fascinating individual. I actually referred to Louis in our first session today because what some of you may not know, and now you will, it may have actually been on our first quiz that just came out. So if it is, this is one of the answers. Louis really was the individual, I believe, that coined the term SMINT, which is social media intelligence. And no surprise, because anybody who's been out on social media has probably seen Louis and him sharing some of his wonderful depth of expertise. He is right now, actually, like our third moderator here in a second, he's working on his PhD. He's also teaching, like our third moderator, CI courses in his home country and other places. And he's got, again, a wealth of experience. And one of the things I love so much about Louis as well, he's also leading the effort in Skip Portugal, and he's had a number of really fascinating webinars that he's been hosting and moderating over the last few months, a few of which I've had the good fortune to attend, one or two of which have been specifically on the topic we'll be talking about today. Last but certainly not least was Ken Sawka. Ken's the one I've actually known the longest, and it is an absolute treat, frankly, for any of us to have Ken on with us. Ken, like our other two panelists, he's seen it all as well. He's been on both sides of the aisle, and many of us would have known Ken at various times of his career, whether it being at Fold & Company, Outward Insights, Deloitte Consulting, the CIA, or even now, because he's actually president of the Martin+Crumpton group there in the Washington, D.C. area. Ken again is an absolute wealth of experience and knowledge. He is teaching CI courses in a program there at Northeastern University, one of the probably top 40 universities in the US, a wonderful program there that he's involved in. And he is doing his doctorate of education in organizational leadership studies at the university. So these are people, by the way, not only do they have deep experience and perspectives, but they're pursuing it at levels that are beyond what the rest of us mortal folks are doing. So we're going to jump right in to our very first presenter, and that is Ken Sawka. And Ken, by virtue of your first name being the first of the three, we're going to have you kind of set the plate and share the context. So the panel session really is on the future of CI from 2020 to what's next. I'd like you to kind of set the table by sharing some of your views about what you think is going to unfold and progress over the next 30 years. So Ken Sawka, you're up.
Great. Thank you, Craig, and thanks everyone, and really happy to be here. Craig's introductory comments clearly indicate how old I am. I think that's the only conclusion to draw from the longevity that Craig and I have known each other. But in all seriousness, I was really thrilled to be asked to participate in this panel today. And the question that was presented in terms of what will CI look like for the next 30 years, really forced me to sort of pause and think about that and take a look by first thinking about what it's looked like for the past 30, almost all of which I've seen, and think about, what the next 30 will look like. I know there was a session earlier on the last 30, so I won't talk about that. But the first thing that came to mind actually did take me back to my government days when I was an analyst at CIA for about 8 years early in my career, where the focus was very much on intelligence first, and then the application or the topic of intelligence second. So early in my time in the competitive intelligence world, this profession, this discipline went through a lot of anxiety, I think, in terms of naming our profession competitive intelligence or business intelligence or strategic intelligence or Salesforce intelligence. And we really faced a lot or put a lot of emphasis on the word that came before intelligence. I think in the next 30 years that flips, because if there's one thing I've seen in my prior roles at Fulton Company and Deloitte, and currently doing more of a geopolitical and risk intelligence at Martin+Crumpton Group, how we do intelligence on certain topics, I think is what leaders and intelligence users are going to want. Because intelligence really in this day and age and looking forward over the next 3 decades is about offering our intelligence consumers, our decision makers, our leaders and organizations, an objective vision of reality. And there are so many sources of subjective falsehood that we sort of become the truth teller in not only portraying what the external environment looks like within the organizations in which we provide this service, but how that's different from the opinion, say, of an external consulting firm or an ad agency, or kind of most importantly, our consumers' own beliefs and perceptions and stereotypes about the external world. And if the intelligence, putting the I before the C or the S or the B or the whatever, isn't steeped in tradecraft and critical thinking more in the future than we ever have done that in the past, this profession, no matter what that first word is in the title, is going to fail to deliver what I think business leaders are looking for in the next 30 years. So the emphasis has to come back to intelligence as this unique form of knowledge that is objective, that paints a picture of reality, whether that's what our leaders want to hear or not. And then almost based on the consumer's preference is applied to a specific type of decision, competitor differentiation, strategic vision over a longer period, tactical Salesforce intelligence, trying to understand geopolitical trends, trying to understand technology risk, right? For me, in the next 30 years, that's the second piece. The first piece is intelligence. And I think what that leads to is giving our intelligence consumers an ability to do with those insights and those beliefs and those perceptions and those judgments what they deem necessary. So one thing I've observed, just quickly looking backwards for a minute, is intelligence, frankly, and hate to say this in this community, isn't always actionable. In fact, I would argue that in more cases than not, intelligence is often a reconfirmation of what a leadership team believes or thinks they believe about the environment. And if intelligence does present a legitimate view of the external environment that is at odds with those beliefs or perceptions, that's what's behind strategic paralysis. Not so much because our consumers don't believe it, it's that they don't know what to do with it. Because if it goes against what they expect us to say about the external environment, they do become somewhat strategically paralyzed in terms of not knowing how to respond to a reality that is different from what they want or expect to believe. And so I think the next 30 years is going to compel us as intelligence practitioners in different segments of business or competitive or strategic or whatever, to not only present that objective viewpoint of reality, steeped in tradecraft based on critical thinking, but also be an advisor on what to do with it. because the world is not going to get any simpler. It's not going to get any less complex. It's not going to get any less challenging for leaders of organizations. And if we can't also navigate that objective view of reality that we are delivering with tradecraft steeped intelligence, it's not going to have any value. And the leadership in organizations that I deal with day in and day out are really struggling to understand, what does a global pandemic health crisis mean for my organization strategy next year? There are 50, valid opinions on that. Ours needs to be one steeped in evidence, in data, and in critical thinking skills. And when that delivers an answer to the question that our leaders and our consumers don't expect, it's our obligation to help them navigate it and put it to good use. So let me stop there. I'm certainly eager to hear what Rostyk and Louis have to say, but that's sort of how I approached it when confronted with that question.
Great, thanks a lot, Ken. Louis, we're going to move to you second, and you can either build on, extend, expand on Ken's starting comments. Love to hear you.
I have a lot to say, so cut me off, Craig, if I'm going too fast or too far. First and foremost, thank you very much for having me, CI Fellows. Congrats to the organization, Cynthia, Claudia, and Barmely, and the sponsors that make this possible. Moderator, Dr. Craig Fletcher, thank you. The audience for their time, which is without audience, there's no event. And also for my fellow panelists and also the fellows that have been the ambassadors, the champions, the mentors, and the educators all this time. Otherwise, we will definitely not be here. Okay, so first and foremost, I would like to do kind of almost a pre-talk, meaning kind of assumptions. So pretty much all that we're going to say here is wrong. Why? Because there's something called VUCA, which will make us wrong, right? So even if we use Pareto law and we have 20% of what we know now will inform 80% of what will happen in the future, there is still another 20% that we don't know. So the unknown unknowns, the VUCA, whatever we want to call it, which will make us wrong, right? So this is basically what we see going into the future. And the other thing that I would like to share is that I start thinking about this, and we've been living through different paradigms in CI, so different eras, if we want. John Prescott actually wrote a paper about this, the four eras. But the thing is that these paradigms, they manifest themselves much after or a long time after actually they were invented. So for example, artificial intelligence was invented in the 50s when they started thinking about it and talking about it and writing papers about it, but it only became mainstream about now. So in the 2010s, 2020s, I think we'll see a lot of these going into the future. Why is that? Because in order for these concepts to really get traction, you have to have a lot of cross impacts. So there's got to be a context where these trends and these technologies actually talk to each other or actually reinforce each other, which will then make them go into the mainstream. So my logic, just and I can stop here or I can continue. My logic was about to see what were the paradigms, what were the scenarios, if we want, that we can see in the future. So what would be these paradigms, these eras of CI? And to do that, we need to also understand what are the trends, what are the factors, or what are the guide rails that actually leads us into these potential or possible or probable futures, right? And that, of course, will have impacts on CI. So basically, my thinking when I was preparing this is okay, so these are the paradigms, back and also forward, and then we have trends that basically model or guide rail these paradigms, and then you have the impacts. So basically, if we start until the 70s, it was about collecting data. Craig, you said that, and you discussed that. Then it was about analysis, so industry and competitor analysis, pretty much. Okay, so we basically got from the collection into the CI systems thing. Then we went into the 90s as a CI as a strategic resource. So basically, it was about the insight, about the decision making. knowledge management, environmental scanning, seeing what was kind of coming into the future so we know what to do. Then we went in the core capability, so CI as a core capability, talking about competitive advantage. This was basically about the usage and the intelligence itself, actually something that Ken was saying. So it became the strategic, the scientific, so a lot of scientific production started to happen, and then BI. And then in the 2010s, which is basically what we have kind of just finished now, it was about kind of the social media kind of appearance, Web 2.0, user-generated content, which was the first time that we had access, direct access to the consumer or to the voice of the consumer, and also the information overload, something that it was, of course, kind of, again, it was identified a long time ago, actually in the 60s, but I think that when we really felt and we are really feeling this is information overload is now. So we have much more information that we can process. Okay, so that actually puts the focus on analytics and information, but also on data science. So I would say that the 2010s, the last decade was about data science. So you heard a lot. So data science is the kind of the most sexy kind of a profession. And Craig, you mentioned that as well. So I think that we should have led that movement, and somehow we didn't. So this is kind of also, I'm actually beating myself for not actually pushing that much further. I'm now actually going into length into depth into that realm, but maybe I was even a little bit too late. So going forward, and then I'll stop here. 2020s, I think that now is the time for CI in real time. So timeliness is now of the essence. So if you don't, more and more things are happening so fast that if you are not on time, like you don't have intelligence, right? You would have an information mostly, or knowledge, because it's something that it was already proven. And also it's about dissemination. So it's timeliness, but also to make sure that the information gets to the decision maker at time, okay? Going a little bit forward into the next decade, so 2030 onwards, I would say that it will be all about human-centered, competitive artificial intelligence. What do I mean by this? I mean automation, I mean scale intelligence, okay? But also, and I think that will be kind of the concept of the 30s, augmented intelligence. So it's about how the machine and the human will actually merge to develop even better intelligence. And then the 40s, so the last decade that we are looking, I would say it will be about social intelligence. It will be really about collaborative and about real foresight. Okay, so being able to really kind of see what's coming down the line. And as a complete guess now, I would say that the 2050s, if everything goes according to plan, we will have kind of the event or the advent of singularity. And then I would say that kind of this will be really interesting because we will have kind of a knowledge, right? It's not just about kind of we don't have foresight anymore. We will know what's going to happen next, or this kind of thing. So instead of foresight, we'll be able to forecast. And this would be kind of my main ideas or foresight on the topic of foresight for CI. And I stop here.
Oh, very good. Thank you so much for setting the table too. So let's, Rostyk, you're the third one up to at least again kind of give us some context. So I'd like to hear your thoughts as well, and then we'll jump into a number of kind of deep questions to converse about.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks to everybody. It's a pleasure being here. Congratulations to the CI Fellows on celebrating 30 years. Congratulations to Cynthia, Claudia, primarily, and the whole organizing committee for putting this together. It's a great event so far, and it's an honor to be a part of this. How do you follow what's just been said? I can only build on some of the topics and areas. And the first thing I wanted to kind of bring to our attention is that what when we've been asked to be a part of this panel, I looked at myself and I said, well, we really have to, we're asked to do foresight. We're asked to basically do the preemptiveness of what foresight is. We want to build, the reason why we're discussing these things is we want to build potentially these futures that don't yet exist. And I think a lot of the stuff that we're discussing here is just maybe personal drivers in some way of where we want to see the profession go, where we want to see the profession grow. But it's also, you know, doing a little bit more of analysis on ourselves, as a profession, and really looking at deeply looking at what has been working, what hasn't, and where can we potentially drive some of the initiatives forward, given the extensive uncertainties and everything that's happening around us. And so for me, I'll build on Ken's and Luis's kind of ideas, and I'll push it a little bit further just from my perspective on, when we talk about competitive intelligence. When I started in this field, competitive was very difficult for me to define, especially from my experience working in the public sector. I'm, you know, working as part of the provincial government entity. I've started as part of the provincial government in my career in CI, and so for us, defining competitive intelligence was very difficult because it's not something that governments look to do. They're not looking to compete, they're looking to collaborate, to innovate, to work together, to look for partnerships. And so I think, and again, thinking into the future for the next 30 years, competitive is going to fall out of what intelligence is. I think it's, again, whether we define it strategic intelligence or foresight or whatever it is, I think we've tended to latch on to specific areas within our organizations, whether it's finance, whether it's business development, whether it's product development, whether it's the CEO, but we tend to look for decision makers when we provide our intelligence, because we want to enable that better decision to be made. And so I think in the future, we're going to basically see a lot more intra-organizational intelligence, where we're going to have to build networks within not just one team, but within the entirety of the organization, whether it's marketing, communications, and we will have to provide that intelligence that's applicable to the team, but it's also applicable to the entirety of the organization. So we're going to have to understand how those teams and bring them together to drive the strategy forward for the organization. Where I think we're going to see growth in CI as well is intra-organizational intelligence. And this is going to be us actually utilizing and applying our skills as not only intelligence analysts, but also in conveners of bringing together other individuals who are thought leaders, and we would be basically bringing those individuals from outside of our organizations in order to be able to drive intelligence at a much higher level. And this brings me kind of to the second topic of where I see intelligence evolving, is that I think in the next 30 years, intelligence leaders are drawn naturally towards positions potentially where we can enable some decision to be better. And I think we're going to see intelligence being practiced and utilized more at, let's say, municipal levels, at government levels, at nonprofits, at chambers of commerce, at regional economic development authorities, where we will see those individuals really tapping into resources of the intelligence practitioner to make us, to help us serve for the greater good of the society, whether it's addressing a mega trend or whether it's addressing a challenge that the region or the country or the province or the state are facing. And I think we're going to see, again, we look at the leaders in CI right now, and we look at across the board of how many different boards people sit on, how many universities they teach at. I think we're going to see a lot more of that as well, where we're going to use intra and inter-organizational intelligence to be able to address not only organizational challenges, but address challenges at a much broader, greater perspective, and being those global citizens that are impacting the trends that are kind of revolving around us. And then the other kind of aspect I wanted to bring to the table is the fact that we are VUCA is going to continue happening around us. That's not going to go away. And human intelligence, just like Luis said, is going to continue thriving, but not only from the perspective of data gathering, but also from the analysis perspective, where I think that crowdsourcing component of being able to analyze data in real time and analyze insights to be able to bring in individuals and perspectives from various kind of organizations and entities, that human intelligence side of things will become a huge component in the analytics of insights, and to be able to provide that. So yeah, again, there's a lot of other aspects, but I'll stop on that, and we'll continue the discussions. But those are my perceptions of where CI could be potentially going in the next 30 years.
Oh, outstanding. So it should be clear to the audience already that we've got three of the deepest thinking analytical talents here in the CI world on the panel. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you guys a chance to kind of put the rubber to the road, as they say. So I want to start, and I want to do I want to develop kind of with the three of us two scenarios for 2050. I wanted, and let's polarize it. Let's do a worst case and a best case 2050 scenario. So if we could, let's start on the negative side. If things go really badly for the field and for practice, and for those of us that are leading this profession, for those of us in any stakeholding role in CI, what does the worst case scenario look like in your mind 2050? And again, any one of you, feel free to jump on in and get us started with this. What's the worst things that can happen?
I don't know if anybody's ever heard of or seen the movie Idiocracy. It's an old film, and there are so many movies about the future. This is the one that I'm most fearful of actually becoming true.
Ken, it's a documentary. Did you know that?
You know, I think if you look at it from today's perspective, it would seem that way. I'm not going to get into the details of the movie because I don't want to spoil. It's really worth, you know, finding and renting or downloading from Netflix or wherever. It's terrific. But it's a world in which intellectualism is highly discounted or even discouraged. It's a world in which individuals kind of make up their own reality. And it's a world in which the degree of influence by a variety of organizations is exerted on people out of the self-interest of the organization doing the assertion. And I think the worst case scenario is one in which leaders and leadership is developed and practiced in organizations to value gut feel perception behind decision making over objective truth telling and reality, number one. Number two, organizations are sort of handicapped in really being able to think long term, which has been, you know, a trend probably for the past 20 or 30 years in and of itself. And number three, there are actually active efforts underway by a variety of external actors to distort reality to the extent possible through deep fakes, through the misapplication of artificial intelligence, through cyber hacking, whatever it might be. So you've got this like dual conspiracy of organizations and leaders who value and believe that their own perceptions of reality actually are better than what objective reality tellers say it should be, number one. And number two, an active effort by competitors, by nation states, by individuals, by any sort of evildoer out there to create perceptions of reality that bring benefit back to the people who are doing that at the expense of legitimate organizations. And so all that, you know, shrinks the lane within which intelligence practitioners, as we've all been speaking about for the past 10 or 15 minutes, can really even operate, let alone be valuable. So essentially, subjective perception through a variety of mechanisms overcomes objective reality and truth telling. I'm going to go pour myself a drink right now because that's really.
If I can build on that, I think again. So for those of you who don't know, I was born and grew up in Ukraine. I immigrated to Canada in 1992, so right when the Soviet Union was breaking up. So for 13 years, I lived in the kind of the communist regime, and I was able to again grow up in a country that was under a part of that. And so for me, Ken is building on something that I think for me is that's the fearful factor for CI is that it's being utilized to drive specific agendas forward. It's being utilized to build fear in the general public, to misinform the public, because there's so much information out there that exists that they basically latch on to whatever the thing is that is for them. And so for me, it's that having the leaders, whether it's at the country level or whether it's at organizational level, to utilizing intelligence to drive specific agendas forward rather than actually using it for what it's supposed to be doing. And that's, again, informing decision making. It's providing individuals with a neutral perspective on things. So that to me is kind of the fearful factor of where intelligence could be if we don't do some of these things. And I mean, kind of just to wrap up my thought, to be realistic, I think COVID brought a lot of some of the stuff that we already are, we're fearing in the future. We're experiencing a little bit right now with regards to the panic in some ways that has been created. And in some areas, it seems like common sense has lost any realities in some perspectives, whether it's, the science is being discredited and and other things. And so there's so many aspects that we're already seeing that are the start of some of those things where, if we don't change some of that, it's scary to where it potentially could go.
Okay, and I would definitely build on actually your two perspectives from Rostyk and Ken. I think it's the worst case scenario is when there's lack of critical thinking. So, and it's basically that we lose the capability of using critical thinking in both as CI analysts, but also as organizations. And we surrender to the machines. So with all this hype about artificial intelligence and then quantum computing and this kind of things and technologies, it's kind of if we fall into the convenience of kind of having the decisions made for us by the machines, not that the machines actually control us, but like kind of we let ourselves being controlled by the machines, and we lack this capability of thinking critically. I think this is the problem. Like kind of just like, and you see that just what Rostyk was saying about COVID, it just show that we are all just focusing on the short term. We don't have a medium and a long-term plan. We are not thinking, we are not using strategy. We are using VUCA, we are using change the speed of business to actually take the responsibility out of our shoulders and actually kind of just go with the flow. And we are just like kind of sending email to each other and kind of not taking responsibility for our futures and for the strategy of our companies. And I've been saying this a long time, that kind of most companies, most organizations, most CEOs don't have a strategy. And I repeat that on purpose. And I think that COVID just showed me that it was not just a hunch, it was actually kind of something that was true. On the other side of the spectrum, I really agree with Ken on this. Is like kind of we might be running into a future where we will be controlled by data capitalists. And what do I mean by this? This is something that I've been talking for a while now and doing some conferences, like kind of for almost like 5 years now. A data capitalist is like kind of if you want, is a system where you don't have money. The money is actually the data. And the data capitalists are the organizations which will have access to the data and that have the ability, the capability of processing that data and use it, as Ken was saying, to control kind of or to benefit from it and actually controlling. And I think I call this the data divide. So people or organizations who will have access to the data, which will be a lot, but also the critical data, as we were saying, Craig, actually what you guys were saying about small data. It's like it's being able to identify what is the small data that is relevant with all that big data. So it's the small things that really make a big change. And I'll stop here.
Good. So before I actually go and look at the good side of the world, if we are to avoid that worst case future, what one or two things would you tell our practitioners of the present tense to be doing now so that this does not become the manifest reality of 2050? Anyone wants to start and jump in? What should we be doing now? How do we avoid it? We don't want the idiocracy, and we certainly don't want the data barons to replace the oil barons, right, of the past. So what do we do? What two things you guys recommend we do now in order to, hopefully alleviate or avert that future?
I think we really need to push CI education. So I think that is really the inflection point, because if we do that, and if we teach and it's not just CI professionals, it's like about managers too. It's strategists, it's people in social sciences, scientists, and so on, to really think critically and make use of common sense and use structured analytical techniques and so on. This will, of course, propagate into the future, and the future will be much better. So we will go into the positive side of things instead of going into the negative.
Good. Rostyk or Ken, you have some suggestions of what we should be doing now to avoid that idiocracy?
I think Ken was speaking. He was on mute, so I'll let him speak.
Yeah, so sorry about that. Thank goodness for Zoom for telling me that nobody can hear me. So to build on what Louis said, critical thinking, CI education is super important. What I would add to that is the necessity of learning how to structure an argument to compel intelligence consumers that an intelligence analyst's objective perception of reality is the one to believe. My teaching in Northeastern has focused on, with the 2 or 3 classes I teach there, having my students develop that capability. And when I was at CIA, you couldn't progress as an analyst without having gone through training and then demonstrating in your written product the ability not only to think critically and formulate judgments, but present them in such a way that they are almost without argument. And not only to tell a story, that's becoming actually somewhat trite, I think, but to think about claims, subclaims, refutation of claims, the use of properly diagnostic evidence, and a structure of a communication, be it a briefing, a written paper, whatever it is, that your recipient almost has no other option but to believe what you're saying in ways that, again, aren't based on a subjective agenda, but are based on a critical evaluation of data sets. And the simple definition of critical thinking is thinking about thinking. It's understanding how you draw judgments and arrive at conclusions. And if you can't demonstrate how you got to a judgment along with the judgment itself, the profession of intelligence is so at risk of being overtaken by all the dark forces that we talked about. It's actually kind of scary.
And what I'll add to that is what I maybe call psychology of intelligence. And I think it's what Ken was saying. It's not only the importance of our outputs, but it's the importance of understanding of who those outputs are directed towards. We really have to understand who are the decision makers, what are their drivers, and how do we make them understand that whatever we're providing them with on our analysis points, that really addresses them on who who they are as the audience. And so that it's that additional layer of the argument has to be compelling, but it has to be compelling for the audience that we're also directing it, because we're talking to various audiences, and they all have different drivers for what how do they receive information, and what that information means to them, and that the intelligence and the insights. And so I think it's that really understanding the psychological aspects of drivers of decision making, and how we provide that output to those individuals. That to me is something that we need to continue doing in addition. And I think education plays a big role, because we are now educating those leaders, whether it's within our organization, whether it's the municipal level or others, where we're educating them about the intelligence itself. And so that's just an additional layer to what's been said.
Go ahead, Louis.
And I would like just to add on top of this, but what we are really saying here is design thinking applied to competitive intelligence. So it's the capability of joining art and science. So what Ken was saying about the structured analysis, the critical thinking, but also the emotional, how we can actually convince someone without a secondary agenda, but having the heart, the science and the art together. And also creating the empathy. So understanding what is the best way to argument, because every person is a person. So we can just something that works with you, Craig, doesn't work with Ken. So we also need this empathy and knowing how can we actually kind of make our point across. So it's the intelligence is actually actioned going forward.
The additional layer, sorry, I just wanted to add on the education side of things is, me and Luis talked about this quite a bit, is it's intelligence going beyond just an MBA program or an MBA type of, it's going to the science level, it's going to the PhDs, to the postdocs, it's teaching the individuals who have they don't, business is not their thing, but it's, they have to also understand and be aware of the things that are happening around us when it comes to intelligence, because those individuals become decision makers as well. And those are the change agents for some of this. And so when you can link it not to just arts, science, and social sciences, but include it in the sciences and teach some of the concepts that we were talking about at the master's, postdoc, PhD levels, all across kind of the studies, I think that's going to have a huge impact and influence on really bringing education forward for intelligence.
Couldn't agree more.
So let's take that to 2050, and now let's look at, and you guys have kind of set the segue nicely here. So unicorns, rainbow colored unicorns come out of their barns, chocolate bars everywhere, the sun is shining. We got alternate future 2050. It's beautiful. Help us visualize what that's going to look like. Who wants to start on that one?
God, we're all a bunch of pessimists. We have a harder time answering the
Realist.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me take a crack, because I think, Craig, if you would ask that question maybe of this group or this profession or the fellows maybe 5 or 10 years ago, I think the answer would have been, well, every organization has a chief intelligence officer. There is somebody at the C-suite with the responsibility of delivering intelligence to senior leadership. And that'd be wonderful. That's not enough. And so I think it is the ability, not only, as I said before, for leaders to absorb and know how to apply objective reality. It's the creation of organizations that learn and evolve and thrive on the accumulation of that activity. So you may have seen me look away to my bookshelf a couple of minutes ago. There's a book for my doctorate work called Images of Organization, where it's, Craig knows it, it's I think 8 or 10 different metaphors for organizations. And the 2 or 3 that I think were most compelling for me in that book are organizations that evolve over time and improve their entire being by an evolution of being not only a learning organization, but establishing culture, openness, and methods of disagreement, and all the things that I think we've been talking about on an individual or personal level in terms of training and individual development applied to the organization. And so if we can have not only intelligence present at the C-suite, that'd be wonderful, but being able to influence the very behavior of organizations so that they are learning organizations that evolve, thrive, succeed, and continue to grow based on not only absorbing and retaining the learning that objective intelligence brings, but having a track record of success in terms of strategic thinking and action in the marketplace based on, in part, what intelligence inputs provide in that regard.
Great. Rostyk?
I think, again, so, I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and then, the example of World Health Organization and COVID, and I don't know, you probably all know that they had scenario planning sessions in October and November, and they had wargaming sessions, and this was all presented as a plausible and very realistic case. And again, you look at it and you ask yourself, what happened? Why didn't this get taken to the next stage of actually, planning and kind of, utilizing the early risk warnings and I think so for me, the biggest, the what if is, did we as intelligence practitioners at that level, were we not good at presenting that, was the intelligence not compelling enough to be able to make that decision maker really understand that, hey, this is going to be the reality? And so I think when I talked about us kind of being the global citizens as CI practitioners or as intelligence practitioners, I think that's what I really meant, is us being able to not only bring our organizations to the level of being, learning organizations, but it's more of the being that global citizen and having an impact on a much broader level, because we are not driven by any specific decision. We're not driven by anything we're driven by the facts, and we're driven by some of the insights. We're driven by constantly learning and trying to push the boundaries of really understanding not only the positives, not only the negatives, but really bringing an objective perspective into this. And so I think incorporating risk and early risk warning and strategy and foresight and all those components and really living them. And foresight, I think in the future is not going to be looking at 30, 40 years down the road. It's going to be looking at like maybe 6 to 12 months or maybe 12 to 2 years down the road. That's what foresight is going to be. It's going to be real life foresight. And it's going to be, looking at what are the factors that are impacting us right now that is going to impact us on a global scale if we are doing that, as well as the individual level. And so I think for me, that's kind of the unicorns and rainbows aspect of CI, is that we have a much broader, I think, calling as intelligence practitioners, and we have a much bigger role to play as being those global citizens and change agents to inform individuals and bring those intellects together that might not be practicing intelligence practitioners, but have that wealth of information, but they don't know how to apply it to whether it's organizational or strategic level. And so I think in incorporating risk and early risk warning into the picture of opportunities and strategy, I think we have to make that linkage between all of those aspects to drive intelligence forward and be impactful.
Louis?
So, let's see if I can explain all the things that I want to explain. So first, Ken, building on top of what Ken was saying, completely agree. So I would see the CIO. So that is critical, because he has got to be in a position to influence the direction of the organization, but pretty much as a facilitator. So someone, for example, that has your job, Craig. So kind of the learning, kind of the facilitator of, and this is my concept, a culture of intelligence. So kind of hold the brand managers, hold the supply chain managers, and I'm saying managers, but I'm also kind of mentioning the executives. So everyone in the company, in sales, in marketing, in customer service, everyone must decide based on insights, not based on kind of just their gut feeling or kind of the politics of the organization or whatever they feel like. Okay, so this is the first point. And you see the roadmap of CI when you implement the CI, and it's like culture, the intelligence culture is always the most difficult kind of a factor to move forward. The second one is basically what Rostyk was saying about, I would call it kind of the social impact. So CI having not just an organization kind of impact, but also a social impact. And for example, using CI for climate change. So kind of using our tools, our analysis, our scenario plannings, war games, and why doesn't this COVID thing kind of why didn't they action it? It doesn't make any sense. And finally, so the third point is about what I mentioned before on the paradigms going forward. That would be the social intelligence. So when intelligence is basically kind of a collaborative thing. So it's everything is connected, and we are all kind of intelligence is almost a second nature. So this would be for me the kind of the rainbows and the unicorns, as Craig, you were saying.
Oh, that's great, guys. I actually got a question in that's related to where I want to go with this next. So I want you to, we talked a little bit about the art and science. I heard a couple of you mention that. I want to talk about the tradecraft for a second then. Ken, I know, brought that up a number of times. So let's look at the tradecraft. And I want to get a sense of two things. And here's where I'm going to ask the question from Beto as well. So what is likely to differ in the tradecraft 30 years out than what we're seeing now? And maybe more importantly, Beto asked, well, therefore, what should we be scrapping that we're doing now? And what maybe should we kind of reskill or upskill with that we need to be doing in 30 years tradecraft wise? So I'll start with that. And, any one of you want to, jump on in first, go right ahead. Ken, maybe?
Sure. Yeah, no, happy to. A great question. Actually, one that was given some thought to. So I'm glad it was asked. I think both Rostyk and Luis mentioned it. We as a CI profession have been somewhat, in my opinion, overly reliant on business school frameworks. And 30 years out, those are not going to be sufficient. No disrespect to the MBAs out there. But again, when I was a young analyst at the agency, we were trained on a set of structured analytic techniques that facilitated critical thinking. There were a bunch of techniques that really forced analysts to question why they were arriving at the judgments they were arriving at. And so I think we have an opportunity here as a profession to build on a body of work in critical thinking analytic techniques that goes way beyond 5 forces and test and SWOT and all the business school techniques. Not that those aren't useful, they are. But one technique that I teach in my classes at Northeastern is the analysis of competing hypotheses, where you are forced to let data and evidence compete for, or have hypotheses compete for veracity based on not only the preponderance of evidence, but the diagnosticity of evidence. And instead of sequentially examining and either accepting or rejecting possible explanations to an intelligence question, you let those possible explanations compete with each other. And what you do in that regard, and I think one way that technique is often misapplied, is you don't let the hypothesis or the potential explanation that has the best evidentiary support win out. You use it to eliminate the ones with weak evidentiary support. And it goes back to the hypothesis, there are only white swans in the world. Well, that's true until the day somebody sees a black swan. And it takes that one piece of disconfirming evidence to refute the hypothesis. And getting to critical thinking-based structured techniques like that let analysts say, the reason why I think this is the right judgment is because I was able to reject all these other judgments. And sorry, nothing in the business school curriculum does that. And so understanding almost from a psychological basis, and Rostyk, you mentioned it earlier, the psychology of intelligence analysis, what human cognition looks like, and developing analytic tradecraft that enhances the pieces of human cognition that are beneficial for this work and mitigates against those parts of human cognition that are detrimental, has to be a core part of the tradecraft. It has to be something that, to the question, CI professionals, CI groups, can begin incorporating right away.
If I can add to you've asked the question about what should we stop, or what could we drop, and what could we go forward with, or some of the things. I think again, so this is potentially from personal experience more than others, but also observational, is we as intelligence practitioners, and I think Ken mentioned it, and I think we've heard it all throughout the days in some of the sessions, is that we tend to, not necessarily because we choose to, but we were asked to provide intelligence that supports the decision makers' actions or strategy or things or perceptions. And when we present something that doesn't align with what they think is right, it all of a sudden gets rejected. I think the biggest thing for me has been a learning experience throughout my career is learning how to have a voice, and how to have a voice for actually standing up for what you think that objective data is saying, and actually being able to voice it, not condescendingly, not challengingly, but to voice it to the decision maker, to be able to say, this is regardless of what your perceptions are, this is the reality. Whether you like it or not, this is how things are potentially going to go down, because the science of data and everything else is telling us that. And I think we as practitioners sometimes, because our livelihoods depend on this. We don't what are some of the repercussions that will happen if we challenge our the CEO or whatever on some of the decisions. We might not be able to work in that organization anymore, right? And so I think the kind of the employment versus being able to voice your concerns, always being employed always trumps everything, right? But in reality, I think we have to learn how to appropriately and rightfully voice our opinions and have confidence in what our analysis are saying, and stand up for what we think might be super challenging to what the norm is. And I think we have to do that also internally in CI. I think we have to do that to each other. We have to do that amongst each other. We have to challenge some of the norms, because again, we tend to again look to the outside and not look on the inside. But I think we have to look at ourselves as well as a practice and say, where can we challenge some of the practices or the techniques or things that are happening, and maybe they don't make sense anymore, and we have to move forward with them. So I think that's, to me, that's kind of again the what should we drop, what could we potentially do more of.
Rostyk, I think you built a little bit on Liam Fahey's earlier comments as well. You know, one of the things that he left us at the very end with was we need to do some double loop learning on ourselves, right? We've got to reflect, you know, we've got to evaluate, we've got to learn from our losses.
And be realistic about it, and be cognizant that not everything is going to be great and peachy, and accept the realities that things are negative, and we can learn from those negatives and we can move forward with them. And sometimes risks present opportunities within them. And I think we have to look at it from a very clear objective and then clear eye, and not be, you know, not take everything as a hurtful thing and a thing that might put us down as a professional, or you know, or our worth as an individual or an intellectual. I think, you know, sometimes people tend to put personal over others, and it's like, well, you're not, you know, you're now questioning my intelligence as a practitioner in CI. And so it's not about that. It's about how can we push ourselves to be better at what we do.
Well, in Rostyk, that goes back to the notion of not only a learning organization, but an adaptive organization, right? Yeah. So in my government days, you know, we always worried about if we were telling the policymaker something he or she didn't want to know, we risk losing access. And that's like death, right? For an intelligence professional. Like if you can't get to the principal, you know, what are you going to work for? And we have to overcome that fear. Not everyone's going to agree with what we say. And if an intelligence consumer goes out of his or her way to call you or email you and express disagreement, welcome it, because it means they read it. It means they care enough to express their opinion to you, and it's an ability to build that organizational learning that I was talking about before. I had a situation when I was at Deloitte where a partner just like tore me apart in terms of some analysis I had written about some pricing trends. And it was important for me to hear it. One, I'm glad he called. Two, he was seeing activity in the market that I missed. And he was in the market every day trying to sell services. So I needed to hear that disagreement, and it was all respectful. But, you know, I think it made me a better analyst, and hopefully it made Deloitte a better organization for using the intelligence that my team and I were trying to provide.
Okay, so going back to the tradecraft, what should we get rid of? Definitely cognitive bias. So we need to be aware of our limitations so we can improve. It's exactly what we were just saying, but in a little bit like kind of a different terms. What it would be like, so how could we kind of improve the tradecraft? First, use CI on CI. Craig knows I'm using analysis of competing hypotheses. Then this is a coincidence that can just talk about it on actually defining competitive intelligence. This is a paper that I'm developing. But we also need to use CI to see what is the technology, mapping technology going forward, and actually being the ones leading the agenda. And this is where I was saying before that we really need to lead the agenda, and we can do it because we actually know how to do it. We need to use CI on CI, so not just use CI for external kind of users. Let's put it like this. The other thing that I would say is we really need to become consumer centric. We don't give enough attention to the consumer. And when I say consumer, is consumer about the services and the products, not of CI, but from our organizations. So if I sell cars, I need to understand the consumer of cars. And this is something that historically CI professionals are not good in doing this. Market researchers, which are researchers, so they just basically say what the consumer said. They don't even interpret the facts, and they don't get to the insights which are there. So the marketeers normally do this, but we are the experts, and I'm saying this in between quotes, we should be the experts in doing that and actually providing these, of course, with the help of market research, but actually integrating that into our value chain, and then kind of give a much better product which can inform much better decisions. And finally, we really need to get much better in marketing of CI. So I think this is our Achilles heel. I've been talking about this for quite a long time now. And unless we do so, and this also builds on point of Ken, we really need to kind of to build the insights, develop the insights, but we need to also to argument those insights. And one of those insights is actually we need to argument that why CI is so important. I think that we really need to define what CI is, and then we can market it, because unless we come on an agreement. What is CI? What is the scope? Unless we do this, we will not be able to market conveniently, because we will not be able to be convincing as Ken was saying. And this would be
you know what would be even better, Luis, is if it wasn't us who were doing the marketing. If it was the people receiving the outputs from us that did the marketing for us, because
word
then
of mouth
becomes that much more impactful.
Yeah, that's word of mouth marketing. But again, we need to be able to, let's say, support that because, for example, if you do an amazing delivery and you don't even brand it, again, like you see, the word of mouth might not go. So this information travels 6 times faster than real kind of how can I say correct information. So what I mean, so if we don't market ourselves, no one will.
So let me ask a question that came in from the audience while you guys were speaking. It came in from Lori, and I want to apply it to what we were just talking about. What has been our biggest miss when it comes to tradecraft? I mean, what is it that we've been investing in that we just didn't get the productivity out of? What would you say it is, the biggest miss?
Biggest miss. Good question.
Yeah.
It's a really good question. Well,
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me, and again, it's going to be a little bit of a retrospective look, is, you know, this is going to sound awful. This is not going to come that well. So just a trigger warning here, right? Like, I think for a long time, CI practitioners have tried to like curry favor with other knowledge workers in their organization. Like, we try to be besties with market research, and we tried to be besties with strategic planning, and we tried to be besties with finance, you know, other organizations that were providing inputs. And, you know, I'm not saying like, you know, go rogue in your organization and ignore all that. It's very counter to what we've been saying. But intelligence does have a uniqueness to it. And I think it goes back to points already made in terms of differentiating and marketing the value. You know, the product that we produce kind of has to speak for itself. Like, I can run around an organization all day saying, you need more intelligence, it's great. If the product that I produce isn't valuable in the eyes of the intelligence user and in the eyes of leadership, doesn't matter what I say, right? So I think we need to recognize that there is a distinctiveness that is an important input into decision-making, along with market research and pricing analysis and finance and whatever other knowledge inputs there might be. But at times, we're going to be the contrarian. Our judgments are going to run counter to what other knowledge providers in organizations are producing and saying to those same sets of internal consumers. And we got to stop apologizing for that.
Yep. I would say this: we have to earn and own a seat at the table. What do I mean by this? We are not a staff function. We are much more than that. But we have to hone that. Okay, so it's like kind of we have to earn it again with a good product and so on, but we also have to own it, and we also need to be involved in the decision making, because like we were the ones who processed the data, so we might have access to information that we processed in some way, but when the decision is going to be made, it gains a new or it kind of trumps a new insight. So we actually kind of need to input this into the decision making. So I think that and again, this goes back to what I was saying about the intelligence culture. So you really need to kind of to involve these people. Not just, we cannot be seen as just kind of okay, just get me the data that supports what I think. I think that is the biggest myth.
To add to that, I was watching a documentary yesterday. It was just a quick kind of 30-minute documentary on Denmark and how they've addressed COVID at their schools levels. And the biggest thing that came out of that is that the individuals at schools said that they were enabled and they were allowed by the government to actually make decisions by themselves on what they felt was the best thing for their specific school or their specific region. So I think, again, from personal experience, we sometimes assumed in intelligence practice that that they're not necessarily the one size fits all, but the intelligence outputs that you produce all of a sudden will be received the same way across the entire organization, that the entire organization now sees strategy on the same level. And very quickly you find out that sometimes the value chain of how information travels across the organization and who the actual decision makers and influencers are within the organizations might not be the CEO and the C-suite. It might be CEO and he's looking into somebody else who's a brand manager, who's in the sales or whatnot. And I think so the way that information travels, we tended to look at the outputs as providing one kind of bigger picture and hoping that everybody understood what it meant towards the organization. So for me, it kind of brings back to the perspective of we have to really know our audiences, and building on, again, what Ken said is the information and the analysis have to be actionable, and they have to be actionable to the individuals that are actually making that decision, that are looking for that information and that insight. So I think that's what, again, the miss was potentially for me, from my perspective, is we tended to look at the entirety of the organization, and one thing that we produced would be received that same way. It's not necessarily that way. And so.
Great. All right, before I get completely away from the tradecraft, I want to give you one more, what I hope is not going to be a too demanding exercise, but I do think you guys will be able to give a perspective that's going to be very, very unique. So I want you to consider for a minute the ints of intelligence, UMINT, OSINT, SMINT, Louis, GeoInt, counterintelligence. We can go on and on, right? There's no shortage of ints. So here's what I want to do. I want to look ahead, right? We're supposed to be looking towards 2050. If you were betting men and you had to buy one of the ints long and you had to sell one of these ints short, where are you putting your money? Who wants to go first? Louis, you want to start us off?
I would go augmented intelligence, and I would sell competitor intelligence.
And why?
Well, augmented, I've explained before. The competitor, I think that more and more you will go from from competition into co-opetition. I think that is really the way to go. And if you see trends like the gig economy, you see that more and more kind of organizations are fragmenting, and it's going to be a network. So we are bothly competing in ecosystems. And when you compete on ecosystems, you actually, the dynamic capabilities kind of a theory, it's basically how you can you have to depend on each other. Otherwise you get out of the ecosystem. So, and the only way that you can kind of add value is being on the ecosystem. So you have to be there. So competitor will go out, and I'm almost sure. So that would be my foresight on the topic.
I think at the beginning, I kind of stated the competitive side of things. So I think I answered potentially what would I give up, and then in the competitive side of intelligence, I think, to me, it's more collaborative, integrated intelligence. Those are kind of the things that are going to be driving forward. The buy would be kind of and I'm going to cheat here, but it would be a mold between artificial and human intelligence. And the reason why I think is that you can't separate one, and like artificial intelligence or augmented, or it will not replace some of the things that we're doing as humans. And so but I think it will really become a support and an enabler for us to be able to do those analysis better, to be able to do those analysis in real time, to be able to actually, apply the certain principles of foresight and risk and be good with those. So I think to me, the buy would be the mold between augmented or artificial intelligence and human intelligence.
So I'm going to cut that question into two parts, because I think we've been kind of mixing metaphors in terms of applications of intelligence and sources of intelligence. And I think, Craig, your question was more on sources than applications, but I'll answer both. So in terms of sources, look, I got my start in this business in Langley. I'm a human guy. Nothing's going to replace it ever. Now, there are going to be countless variations in the way that human intelligence is reported to us through direct interviewing, social media, probably technologies in 30 years we can't even envision right now. But, hearing it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, is pretty damn valuable, and I don't want to give that up. So I'm going long on human, and I'm selling short on OSINT. Open source intelligence is a commodity. Everyone's going to get it, and it's less reliable and more subjective and less truth-telling in the future than it is now. In terms of applications of intelligence, whether it's competitive, strategic, or whatnot, I agree with Luis. I'm selling short on competitive. Like, this is going to sound shocking coming from me, but really, who the hell cares? You know, there's going to be so much more complexity in markets to the point where in 30 years, I would hypothesize that competitors will be the easiest component of market structure to understand. And I'm going long on risk intelligence. And I think Rostyk and Luis both mentioned this before, where if I can get to a point where I can apply intelligence to minimize or mitigate risk, decision risk, financial risk, geopolitical risk, technology risk, you know, you name it, that's going to have a pretty good return on my dollar in terms of what that looks like on the balance sheet. Hey, Craig, I think you're muted. You pulled a me, man. You're muted.
I did. Boy, I blew that one, huh? All right, good. Hopefully I'm being heard again. Was there anything that you heard from one of the other two that, you know, maybe causes you to rethink where you're going to invest? Anything surprising? Or are we being too conventional here?
Yeah. Well, again, you know, gosh, 30 years. I mean, you know, I don't know what happened for dinner tonight, so 30 years is tough. But again, I think we need to make a distinction between the source and the delivery mechanism, right? Yeah. So, you know, what humans ultimately choose to do in competitive markets, you know, that's the gold standard in terms of understanding, you know, legally and ethically, what different actors in my competitive environment, you know, may or may not do. And again, it's not just and probably even minimally competitors, but my regulatory regime, my technology providers, my trading partners overseas, my governments. The mechanism by which that intelligence gets to us, I think, is the hardest thing to predict. I mean, you know, when I was in the agency at the beginning, and, you know, I can go on Google Maps now and see satellite imagery that was at the highest classification in the late 80s, early 90s. You know, it's still fascinating to me. It's still remarkable. Yeah. And who knows what's going to come next. So, you know, I think a challenge for the profession 30 years out is to invest in those reporting and delivery mechanisms for the most valuable sources of intelligence. Trying to, you know, pick what those are going to be right now. Boy, if I could do that, you know, I'm submitting my resignation tomorrow.
All right, so let's move. I want to move this for a sec then. So I want to think about verticals or industries, and I want you guys to give a thought to which ones do you think might, especially as we look from 2020 to 2050, which of these industries do you expect might be best at leveraging and using, you know, CI capabilities as a potential source of competitive advantage? And me, again, I'm going to give that mirror back to this too. You know, which industries are going to be left behind? So, you know, again, pick one that you think is going to be a paragon of leveraging CI over the next 30 years. Pick another one that you really think is going to be a laggard. You can use talk ostriches and eagles.
Yeah. Wow. That's a podcast. Thanks. So, you know, I'm just going to go with the first one that comes to mind in terms of the industry sector that either both will do best at this or potentially has the most to gain. You know, any capital intensive industry, and the first one that comes to mind is energy and extractives, especially given the shift from, you know, fossil fuels to renewables. Everyone saw the announcement in terms of Shell's long-term strategy to essentially, you know, all but get out of the fossil fuel business over the next 50 years. You know, they've been signaling that for some time, but it seems to be a new stake in the ground. And, you know, using intelligence to know how those new highly capital intensive business opportunities are going to develop. And it goes back to what I said earlier about risk. Like, if I'm a shareholder or I'm a board member trying to get behind the decision to invest billions of dollars in capital in, you know, potentially a largely unproven but high potential technology, damn, I want some good intelligence behind that decision before I'm ready to give thumbs up to that. In terms of laggards, gosh, to be really contrarian, and I may regret this later, healthcare and pharma. I mean, that has been the leading industry, especially biopharma, for so long. But just given the potential for new therapies or strategies to hang on to and commercialize and wring dollars out of old therapies for so long. I was speaking to a former healthcare partner I used to work with at Deloitte, and he told some stories about the payer and provider side, who essentially right now, even 6 months into the worst health crisis any of us have seen in our lifetimes, are just not interested in thinking about new business models. They just don't care. And so, an opportunity to reinvent a sector that I think is in drastic need of reinvention right now. I worry that the entrenched mindset in healthcare broadly is going to cause that sector to, cede that leadership position that's held for so long. I'm sure my email inbox will be filled.
Yeah, full. Rostyk, Louis, you want to jump in next?
I can go next if okay with Louis. I might be dreaming big here. I might be dreaming. I'm not even sure if it's a sector yet or not. But again, being involved for primary, my CI career has been in public service, and I feel like again, public service intelligence, the way that I described it across the board is, if you think about the concept of smart cities and apply it across the board for intelligence, where it becomes the chambers of commerce, there's the regional economic development authorities, the municipal governments, the provincial or state governments, really coming together from the intelligence practitioner's perspective and using intelligence again, and I stress on not just intelligence as a strategy and foresight, but intelligence as a risk mitigation. I think public service intelligence potentially has a bright future ahead for it. It depends on who the leaders are and how it's applied. But again, I'm being kind of optimistic here from this perspective. And again, for the laggards, I didn't want to hurt any feelings and whatnot, but I being in health and being in, I've been working on trying to develop a foresight system for some of the research and impact and evaluating how much money is going into research and whatnot. And so I think health and pharma potentially are not receptive as much to change as other industries, because they are of that mindset of we've been doing it for this long. It still keeps on generating us revenues and great revenues. And so we'll continue doing it this way until we basically can't anymore. And then we'll find the next best thing and we'll, invest billions of dollars, and it's going to go forward for a number of years or decades. I think that's something that's just, it's an industry that's not innovating right now as much when it comes to that. So that would be my kind of the winners and the not so winners.
I'm with you, Rostyk, on the winners and not so winners. So I would say the winners, and I'm just just by looking at the trend, I would say that tech companies, they are using CI, not in the best way, unfortunately, but they are the ones doing kind of the most advanced stuff. So if you see, you go to Netflix, you see the social media dilemma, the new documentary from Netflix, and you see what types of insights these guys are using, not in the best way again. So I'm not promoting this, but they are pretty much kind of manipulating the consumer. So these guys are the only ones who actually look at the consumer, and they kind of they overtook kind of fast moving consumer goods and all the rest of like consumer appliances and all this kind of stuff. So they are really doing it in the best possible way. They are kind of they are investing in the technologies. They are kind of building the culture and so on and so forth. So I would say that for the next, I would say, decade or so, these guys will be on the forefront of using CI. They don't even call it CI, but this is it. I would say this is it. The laggers, I would say actually the government. So there is much improvement, and for example, the government using CI to fight, for example, kind of a white collar crimes, this kind of thing, it's still not being used. So I've talked with them in a few times, and this is the kind of thing that it takes a long time. So it's not because they don't want. I think that they are actually kind of progressing really well, as Rostyk was saying, but they are still on the kind of, they are so way back that they really need to push the agenda forward. But again, I might be surprised, and hopefully I am.
Great. And any other comments from the other two relative to anything you heard from one of your colleagues?
I guess a question I'd ask, one thing, and I thinking back on my answer and now kind of regretting it, not for the industries I chose, but for how I approached the question. One thing that I think we have to be prepared for 30 years out is convergence, number one, and number two, the creation of entirely new industry sectors that don't exist today. Yep. And the potential for like a convergence between consumer and healthcare, or information technology and healthcare. People have been predicting that for forever. But the industries of the future. We try to think back industries that exist today that didn't exist 30 years ago. There are several, right? The whole social media landscape, some technologies that, again, we couldn't have envisioned 30 years ago. Are those dependent on innovative people providing good intelligence to the people putting capital at risk to invent those industries? Probably, in part. I mean, a lot of it is luck, a lot of it is good intuition, a lot of it is just knowing where to invest and how to control that risk. But I'd like to be able to look back 30 years from now and say, there was a innovation and an advent of intelligence that helped pick the name, this new industry 30 years out, come to fruition and mature. And we can kind of look back and say, this profession has something to do with that. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, Ken, just building on top of that, when I mention tech, I'm not just saying the tech that we know now. I'm talking about, and I've read this book quite a few years ago called The Optimistic View of the Future. And basically the only thing that I took from it was, well, I took a lot of stuff, but the key idea was G, N, and R. So genomics, nanotechnology, and robotics. So, and if you mix these three, this is going to be amazing. Okay, so just imagine a small robot that's inside your body and that's taking care of kind of your body from the inside. So, and again, this is tech, right? So it's kind of, but again, you have healthcare, maybe even pharma within this kind of thing. So it's very hard to say what the industry will be called, and I'll just call it tech. But this was basically my point. Regarding Rostyk, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead. Continue.
Because I'm going into another direction. So
I was just going to touch on the topic of converging industries, and what I was going to say is that I had it on my list of some of the things that would be a factor that influences and really presents a challenge for us as intelligence practitioners in the future, is the convergence of industries, and really trying to figure out, in addition to what VUCA stands for and everything else that's around us, those industries that don't yet, are playing in different areas and will come into play in different areas, will be really tough for us to will be another layer for our analysis that will be tough for us to be able to analyze. So I agree. I think that when you look at it from the convergence of industries, you don't know what those will look like in the future, and yeah.
So I was just saying that there was something that Ken said that kind of struck me, which was kind of the UMINT going upwards and the OSINT is going backwards or downwards. I actually think that the two will continue to complement themselves. It's not about, I think that each will not kind of get over the other. I think that it's the integration of both that will make complete sense. So for example, if I don't know, I need to find the needle in the haystack. OSINT can help me do that, and then I go directly into the source, a human source that can actually give me the information that I need. And I think that in that integration, there is kind of a world to explore, and kind of having, as Craig said, kind of presenting SMINT back, and SMINT, I have something to say. So SMINT is social market intelligence. It's not. It's a lot of building social media because you have access to the user-generated content, but it's a little bit more than that. So it's the kind of, it's basically, it was CI in real time, okay? And having done that for 3 years for a top 20 Forbes company, we were never surprised. 3 years, never surprised. So that was basically because of this. And we only went into human intelligence when we really needed to. Most of the information is already available, but if you are able to find it and if you are able to crunch it. So I think that developments like quantum computing, this is where, and artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, this is where these technologies will actually play a role by helping us kind of get the most out of OSINT, which will then potentiate human. So I'm basically agreeing with you. What I would say is that the OSINT plays a role. I think it will definitely play a role.
So let's go with that, because that actually, my next question was going to look at the impact of technology over the next 30 years. So where do you, so Louis, you led me right into this. So where do you see it taking on a more important, a more essential role relative to CI? And here again, I want to look at both sides. You know, where maybe are we having too high an expectation for technology in terms of what we do and what we might do?
Yeah, there's a lot of hype. So most people don't understand artificial intelligence, even more machine learning, and then even more kind of a deep learning. They don't even know why it's called deep learning. Okay, but like I would say that technology will impact pretty much the full cycle. So you will have technologies that will impact the way you can collect information. So for example, IoT, Internet of Things, of course, but like also, for example, 5G, which we have now, but also 6G. So like kind of if you actually kind of increase the hose, much more information will go through. And again, you'll be again in information overload. So you'll need, quantum computing can be kind of the step change technology that will actually make the click and make us kind of really go into a new paradigm. So that was basically my point. But also like edge computing, so kind of the processing power that you have in our computers today is just amazing. So I run kind of algorithms in my computer, and it's like kind of it's a MacBook, it's enormous stuff. So anyone has access to it. I don't even, I'm not a programmer, but I'm able to run algorithms in my own computer. So like you have lots of stuff kind of being developed. What else? Human augmentations. So like, again, when I talk about augmented intelligence, is basically the integration of human and technology in a way that it looks just one. So like kind of and I think this will completely lead us into scenarios or paradigms that we are not kind of able to see now. I wish I was Julius Verne and actually be able to write stories about the future and being right, or Arthur C. Clarke or something. But it's hard because there's going to be a lot of stuff. That said, I presented SMINT in 2012 in Dublin, and we are still not having that many people doing CI in real time. So things take a lot of time. So what I also saying is that the future will be a lot like what we are seeing now. Again, if quantum computing actually comes to life, because there is something that we didn't talk here, is that every single search you run on Google, it's the equivalent of a light bulb being on for 3 days. And that is unsustainable. So there's a backlash here that we were not talking about, but we have to consider this stuff as well.
Backlash, yep. Rostyk.
Yeah. Just to build on what Luis was saying is, I remember my very first SCIP conference and my introduction to CI and whatnot, and then some consequential ones afterwards. It's always been, the stress has been for us to be able to do less data gathering and to do more data analysis. And it's been, I think, it's been, constant kind of message that's been driven in my head. And I think where technology will play a role for us in the future is, and I think we've heard this throughout the conversations today, is where it will be able to convert big data into small data. Because I think the future for us is not big data. The future for us is in small data. And by small data, it's meant by data that's like that's actionable, that's relatable, that's, you know, that addresses the challenges that you're seeing, whether it's your organization or whatever level of decision making you need. And technology will be most impactful in order for us to be able to do those analyses is when it can pull from the vast amount of data that we have and actually pull that small data that's relatable and actionable for us to be able to do the analysis on it. I think that's going to be the interplay between technology and us as human analysts and individuals who are constantly kind of asking questions and then looking for you know, the various opportunities. I think it's going to be that interplay where technology will have the biggest impact.
So I'm going to go in a somewhat different direction. So I think when we talk about, what a surprise. So I think when we talk about technology, there's a tendency, appropriately so, to think information technology, information processing, information availability, information generation. That's fine. 30 years is a long time, right? So 30 years ago was 1990. I think I had my first AOL subscription, and I realized I could book a flight on my computer, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, it won't get any better than this. This is amazing. So 30 years out, I'm going to be dead, so no one's going to even be able to come back and call me on this. What is the prospect? Maybe this is more of a question for my panelists and for others watching, of technology that enables organizations to not only do better at becoming that learning organization and that evolving organization that I talked about earlier, but can we use technology in ways that minimize or mitigate or reduce those cognitive imperfections that make intelligence analysis so hard? So for example, Luis, you mentioned cognitive bias earlier. You know, one bias that Richard Hoyer talks about in The Psychology of Intelligence Analysis, his book, is the man-who syndrome, right? This notion of overly relying on things you have personally observed or that you've heard from a trusted source. Even if there's a preponderance of evidence to refute what the man-who syndrome says is true, we tend to go with the person we know or things that we've seen. What if there were technology that would serve as either a reminder or a way to better and more easily recognize that bias and then do something to mitigate it? Because Hoyer says you can't eliminate cognitive bias. It is part of who we are. The best we can do is to reduce its impact. Can we develop technology that helps us, one, recognize when we are subject to cognitive bias, and two, take measures, I'm not sure what those would be, to find workarounds for those biases that we're subject to? Again, you know, that's my version of booking online flights in 1990. I don't know if it's feasible or not, but in 30 years, maybe.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I kind of hope that that is what happens. And why not? Again, we can see it, we can build it, we can shape it, we can get there. So I got one more question before I go to the Q&A box here that I just want to put on the table. The one thing we haven't really talked about, and I actually got this in the Looking 30 Years Back session before this one, is the global context. So here again, let me have you look globally for a second. You know, all three of you I know are good international travelers. You've lived in places, you've been born in places, you've worked in places, and probably more than most of us. So I want you to think, you know, do you anticipate any region or maybe even country, if, you know, nation state, if you want to, you know, get it that micro, that you think is going to make great strides to being a leader in the application of intelligence 30 years from now? And here again, just to do my reverse side of this, you know, is somebody that maybe is a leader now likely to fall back into the pack? So think globally for a sec. You know, who's got the promise? Who's maybe not got quite the promise?
I think Rostyk wants to answer this.
All right, Rostyk.
I think I was the one who asked the question in the previous section, but I think the reason why I brought it up was, being part of the fellows and being part of the intelligence community and having the ability to talk to intelligence practitioners and leaders across the globe, I think it brings such an immense amount of perspectives that we have yet to consider just because we're operating within our specific realms. I think, again, so from my perspective, U.S. has always been, and again, this is speaking from the Canadian perspective, U.S. has always been seen as the lead in you know, driving intelligence, as the ones who kind of set up intelligence from that field and kind of moved it into the business aspect of things. And but I think there's countries around the globe that are doing things differently. Like, I think whether it's Finland that has a countrywide CI for the network of individuals. Canada now has it's called the Horizons Network, which kind of looks more into developing foresight for the entire country and using analysts, and they have a pretty big team in providing reports to at that level. So I think there's countries that are doing something that, and again, I'm not extremely well versed across the globe of, you know, what countries are doing what, but I think just from the examples, and I think given the few individuals that even we have in Canada here who are pushing CI and where it's been from when I started to where it's at now, I think I see definitely a rise in kind of innovative practices for us in Canada where we are applying CI at different levels, and maybe it's advancing and driving it forward a little bit faster than some of the other ones, just because we're kind of, we don't know what we don't know, so we're just going to try it and see whether it sticks, and if it doesn't, we'll just try something else and we'll just keep on going until it works for us. And so I think we're more just innovative, maybe from the perspective that we're trying things out without kind of worrying how much of a you know, whether it's going to work or not. We're trying that kind of approach. And so that's just, I think there's globally, there are things happening across the globe where some countries are applying it kind of at the national level. And again, I bring the perspective of public service, so I won't be able to go into the kind of the organizational level, but I'm just looking at, because that's the realm that I operate in, and I monitor on a kind of, you know, on an ongoing basis, and seeing what others are doing at that government level. And so I'll be able to speak to that just a bit more than others. So.
Yeah, I agree with Rostyk. What I see now, kind of doing the PhD and looking for a lot of scientific papers, I see Chinese authors kind of really getting a huge production. Again, some of the things it looks to me like they are not really kind of a CI professionals, or it's a little bit too theoretical. But I can see the amount of papers really growing and getting better and better and better. And I see them going back to 2008, 10, 12, these kind of things. So they are not, by now, they should have the practice as well. So I see China as being or becoming more a CI nation. France, I've been teaching in France. Actually, I'm going to teach there next week. France has a culture of intelligence, so the government has made a huge effort back in the day with Alain Joulé and kind of Henri Dou and all those experts. They coin it economic intelligence. They kind of every single company knows what competitive intelligence is, and it's not just the big ones; it also the small and medium enterprises. And this was I've been to France a lot of times. But now kind of teaching and being in the education and talking to companies and running war games stuff there, I really see what they mean, and there's kind of the intelligence culture is already well defined there. So I would say these two clearly. In terms of the US, which is the reference, I see it kind of losing towards kind of these at least these two. But also Europe. I see lots of stuff happening in Europe. I see lots of stuff going under the radar, like Switzerland, like Germany. I also teach in the Central Eastern Europe. There I don't see that so much advanced, but again, Croatia. I see things there. So it's going to be really interesting, and I think that the organizations are finally kind of getting the grips. And maybe I'll leave this to the end, but I think the opportunity for CI is now. I don't go further. I can talk about this later.
So I guess I would approach the question from what country has the economic opportunity in front of it to be able to deploy capital, mitigate risk, and innovate either current or future industries, with the ability to learn from diversity, to learn from new thinking, to learn from contrarian beliefs. And there's so much activity right now, I think, migrating from China, from India to other parts of Southeast Asia.
For
I would pick a country like Singapore. I would pick a country like Indonesia,
Yeah.
even the Philippines, that have so much economic potential. Certainly Singapore, a good deal of ethnic diversity. And I think, you know, a willingness from governments to not only improve, you know, economic conditions, at least in Indonesia and the Philippines, less so in Singapore, but to be more influential on the world stage and have, I think, the ethnic and the risk tolerance makeup to at least have real opportunity to be intelligence leaders. Whether they recognize that or not, I don't know, but that's where I think the potential lies. And I'd agree with Rostyk and Luis in terms of potential laggards. I think the US is at real risk of falling behind in terms of being an intelligence leadership geography. I think, you know, sort of the Five Eyes nations that we would refer to back in my government days, you know, UK, Australia, New Zealand, for many of the same reasons. I'll exclude Canada, Rostyk, out of respect. But, you know, Canada in terms of diversity of thinking and geographic diversity and ethnic diversity, economic opportunity, risk mitigation, I think Canada fits a lot of the same criteria as some of those other countries. But, you know, some of the other Five Eyes nations, I think for sure. I lived in the UK in 2018, and I think they're going to have a tough time. I think some of the recent decisions with regard to Brexit, some leadership decisions, the state of the economy, demographics, are going to make it very hard for you know, nations like that to maintain leadership in this field.
Another country that I think we should also consider is Israel. And I think there's a lot of stuff happening there that, you know, the national system is built towards innovation and intelligence and incorporating it across kind of the country and across various levels. So I think for us to consider, Israel would be also another one on the list.
Definitely.
Great, guys. Listen, we've got about 4 minutes left, so I want to give Cynthia a chance just to give a last kind of call out to what's happening here over the next few hours as well as tomorrow. And I want you to think about something while she's doing that, if you wouldn't mind. I want you to give me one recommendation. If you were advising a practitioner, you know, here on our webinar, the one thing that they should be doing now so that when 2050 does come around, you know, they're going to be at the top or peak of their game. So give that some thought while she's speaking. And as soon as she's done, I'm going to come back to you, ask you for that one takeaway, and we'll be wrapping up. Cynthia?
And you're unmuted, but we can't hear you, Cynthia.
I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, Craig and the panel. I think this is fabulous, the way you have picked up on Liam's thoughts about mindset this morning, and also building off of the theme for this summit. And so I thank you so much for getting us to think more deeply about these issues. And of course, this is just the start of the conversation, right? This is an ongoing one. So I do encourage us to continue with this on the COP, the CI community of practice, which has been going on you know, throughout the session. And I also want to say that tomorrow's sessions will also pick up on this. We've talked about biases, we've talked about foresight, we've talked about technology, building nimble organizations, and so forth. And this ties right into other conversations we'll be having. I think that what I appreciate about what you have talked about, and this session in particular, is that it's helping us avoid getting into the trap of the shoemaker's children, right? Where in CI, we're focused so much on doing the work of foresight for our clients, but we're not looking at ourselves. And we've fallen into that trap a few times already. So I do want to thank you very much for, you know, helping us to shine a light on this area of our practice, and for us to continue on this as well. And I do want to just make a mention too that at the end of this session, at the end of this day, we also have a virtual exhibit hall still open. So visit BI Source on Zoom, and some of us will also be on the COP, the community of practice, you know, to connect with you all as well. And so I look forward to that. And again, thank you so much to our speakers today and to this panel. I'm very much a fan of each of you, as well as a colleague. And I really appreciate your taking us into these directions and giving us a lot to think about. And thank you, Craig, for so ably taking this panel there.
Great, Cynthia. Thank you. So again, let's head out with the one piece of advice each of you are going to leave with our practitioners so that they're at the peak of their game in 2050. And I'll start with Ken.
Damn, I thought I was going to get to go last. I mean, the easy answer is, continuing education, mentorship, those are easy. I would say find an opportunity to live in a leader's shoes. Find an opportunity to have to be in a position to make a decision where the information is incomplete, where the risk is high, and you are uncomfortable with that decision, whether that's academic, in a organizational leadership function or rotation or whatever it might be. Because it's hard, and I wish I had more of those opportunities, frankly, but it's hard for intelligence providers to understand and be supportive of the consumer if we haven't walked a day in their shoes.
Right. Beautiful. Louis.
Yeah. I would have to make Ken my words. No, like really, I was just thinking about this. It's like, again, continuous education, but it's not just continuous education on what you know or where you feel comfortable. It's actually what you don't know. So for example, I give my example. I went into kind of studying artificial intelligence and maths and kind of I think I actually kind of get a much better in terms of emotional intelligence, because I have to deal with all these kind of young guys who know that they can rule the world just by kind of programming. So also I gain a lot of how can I deal with this type of personality. So it's going to something or learn something that you don't know, and you really have to you have to be uncomfortable, otherwise you will not learn. And I think but again, in something that makes sense in the future. But we talk about that already.
Great. Rostyk, finish it up. One piece of advice.
I'll just quickly wrap it up with what I've stressed on before is look within yourself to be able to find that voice that actually allows you to stand up and to say those things that sometimes might be challenging and sometimes might be tough to say to specifically to leaders. Even joining the CI fellows, for me, it was, I'm amongst the rock stars of the CI world. And so sometimes even speaking something that was against, going against some of the thoughts, it took a little bit of an effort, but in reality, it's something that we all learn the best from. I think we need to challenge each other. And I think the Q&A, the unanswered questions that we have just kind of builds on the fact that we need to continue the conversation. Whether you're new to the field, whether you've been doing it for 30 plus years, this is just the start. And I think we need to be actionable with the things that we're saying. So I think rather than just talking about it, we need to start doing things and continue doing them for the greater good of what we do and our profession and where we stand. So that's my wrap up.
Well, you three show us what the greater good can do. And I want to thank each of you. This has been a fabulous session, at least from my perspective. I'm seeing in some of the comments in the background, I'm not the only one that thinks that way. So great job. Thanks. For those of us who want to continue, I know there were some questions that we didn't get a chance to answer. We'll do that in the CI community of practice. Please jump over there. Again, as Cynthia mentioned, don't hesitate to jump into the exhibit hall as well. We'd love to see you over there too. And we look forward to keeping this moving, not only through the next hour or two, but obviously when we get back together tomorrow. So thanks for everyone for joining us. We hope you have a great day, and we're looking forward to continuing in the next day. So thanks again. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all.